welcome to the first, possibly the last, we'll see how it goes, Golazo podcast. We're going to be talking about the Argentina squad for the forthcoming friendlies and how we're going to be going forward from there. And I'm delighted to be joined for this by Tom Robinson. Thanks very much for coming on, Tom.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Peter. It's good to be on this experimental podcast, which I think is going to reflect the makeup of the Argentina squad that we're going to be discussing. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point here. It's a bit of an experiment, as is Lionel Scaloni's squad. So jumping straight in there then, Tom, what do you make of this first squad by an interim coach?
I think it's really encouraging because it seems like finally we've got this rejuvenation of the squad that we've kind of been hoping is going to happen over the last 4 years. But given the mess of the qualification campaign, there was never really a chance to look at those longer term goals. And in the end, it was a wasted opportunity, as we saw with a very old, very slow Argentina squad at the World Cup. So this is a great opportunity for some root and branch changes, a real cut from the past, and try and bring in some new players who, might not be ready next year, but certainly should be in the next 4 years or so, breaking into that Argentina squad. So we can pick from a much more youthful base. What were your impressions of it, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I think the important thing as well is not to necessarily expect immediate results from this group. I think, as you said, there's a lot of players in there that aren't necessarily ready for international football at the top level at this stage of their careers. But I think it's a step in the right direction. And for all of Argentina's failings at youth level over the past, several years, it's quite a promising group, and there's reasons for optimism there. And I think if whoever the AFA obviously move forward with on a permanent basis is given that time, and maybe even the 2019 Copa America isn't a do or die type tournament where anything other than victory or lifting the trophy is failure, then there is a core group there that I think they can move forward towards the ultimate goal of 2022 with maybe the eyes of winning it is a stretch, but certainly being a strong contender once more. Obviously, as you mentioned, it is an experimental squad. Several of the old guard are no longer there. Javier Mascherano, Lucas Biglia, the only two that have kind of confirmed their retirements. But Lionel Messi being the obvious one of asking for a little bit of time away, probably rightly so, to say to the AFA, come on, I'll wait to see what you guys do long term before I commit anything to it. Where do you see Messi's role in this, Tom, or any of the older group for that matter, going forward?
Yeah, I think this is going to be the question that we're all going to be asked about. Where's Messi? But I think everyone should just calm down. It's not definitely a retirement, although I wouldn't remove that possibility from the table. I think this is just a bit of a break so he can hopefully see an actual functioning collective team be built, and then incorporate him into the team later, hopefully, rather than just building the team around Messi. I think let's build the team first and then see how we can fit him in. I wouldn't be surprised to see him back for the Copa, because realistically it might be his last chance of winning some silverware with Argentina. So that's definitely a possibility, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a slightly longer hiatus. And well, would it be the worst thing if he didn't come back?
Well, that's certainly a bold claim. With several of the other players from the golden generation that kind of agonisingly didn't win any gold. There are all the others. You can probably make that argument. I think with Messi at the moment and the state of Argentine football, it's a bold one to say that they can do without him. What do you think, even for 2022, there's still a place potentially for Messi?
Yeah, I think I was just playing devil's advocate there, really. I mean, I think you've always got to find a place for Messi in the squad, whether that be in a more withdrawn midfield role,
Mhm.
as kind of a playmaker from deep, or potentially as a. I mean, we've basically seen him act as a number 10, but maybe not give him quite as much freedom and make it a more defined number 10 in the classic Argentinian fashion, but certainly sort of moving him into a more midfield role, and crucially getting people with good legs around him who can do his running for him. He's a player who doesn't cover a lot of distance and kind of is economic with his energy. So I think if you are going to build a team around him in midfield, it's important to pair him with the right people, and realistically the the forward line looks in quite good nick, even if it's quite a different forward line than we've been used to. So yeah, I would always see if I could persuade Messi to get in the squad, because he is just a different level to everyone else, and even with his advancing years, he's going to be a huge asset in terms of experience and leadership. Even though we've seen that being something that's been questioned in the past, but I think he is growing more into a leadership role, and potentially with some younger players rather than players of his own age. I think that's something you just can't take away how important that was going to be. So yeah, I would definitely see Messi back. If it's not for the Copa, I still think there's a one last hurrah for him at Qatar 2022.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right about his leadership is obviously very different to the style of someone like Mascherano, who's probably a little more demonstrably as a leader, and certainly more appealing with his character to the average Argentine football fan. But I think Messi's leadership in the last 18 months or so was evident, even if it's much more of a quiet sort of leadership. What do you make of some of the others from that generation then, of like the likes of Aguero, Higuain, Di Maria, Banega? Do you think that they're still going to play a role over the next couple of years?
It's going to be a tricky one, isn't it? Because you see Aguero banging a hat-trick for Man City, and you see some of these other guys at club level still performing. But I mean, I even think the last World Cup was probably a mistake to bring some of the likes of Higuain, potentially Di Maria as well. I just think that as good as they can be at their club level, they've shown that when you're bringing them into the national team context, they're not quite at the same level. Maybe it's the fact they can't quite gel into a collective unit, or they've kind of got that mental block of having lost so many times, having got so close, but just not being able to win those crucial games. So for me, even though they are clearly very good players who could still bring something to the national team, I think they've reached a point where you've just got to move on and say, okay, thank you for your service. It's been good. It could have been better, but it's time to try something different. And the fortunate thing with Argentina is, especially up front, you've got so many great options coming through still. So it's not quite like maybe a nation that doesn't produce as many players, and you're just going to always go to those guys. There are options coming through. So certainly up front, I think it's time to change. Di Maria as well. I think he's had his moment with the national team. Banega, I still think he could play a role, certainly in this sort of tradition, in this transition from the old guard and into the new guard. I think certainly for the Copa, Banega is someone who I'd like to see involved, because he does, on his day, he can spread some balls around and really run games and produce moments of utter class. So Banaga's one who I'd like to keep in. The rest, I think I'd move on from.
Yeah, and I think the problem with this change is that now, as you say, it's having to be kind of root and branch change. Whereas I think ideally what we should have been seeing since 2014 really is a much more gradual process of renewal. So we wouldn't have this just complete upheaval after a failed World Cup. I think the failings of several managers really, and the AFA obviously are not exempt from that. has meant that we've seen a real shortage of new faces since 2014, and go into a World Cup 4 years later with more or less or a very similar core group, and just a few youngsters, which as well in large part the younger players struggled for minutes in Russia. So yeah, I mean, I don't think you'll get many complaints from Argentina supporters if a lot of that team, even the likes of Banega or Aguero, are dropped in favour of some of the players that we see in this squad. So with Messi, for example, being out, I guess Paulo Dybala finally gets his moment in the spotlight within this squad. Do you think that's a fair assumption?
Definitely. I think he's going to be one of the key members of this new look squad, and really it's time for him to show what he can do. I think he's been a bit unfairly judged by some of the comments he's made in the past. I think they've been kind of overused and overanalyzed, and realistically he's never had a proper run of games in the national team, and I think I think he's got a golden opportunity to really stake a claim as the sort of new face of this new generation going forward.
Yeah, I think his own comments kind of made it very easy get out for managers by his own admission, saying it's very difficult to kind of fit in with Messi. And I think as soon as things didn't work, then the manager was able to say, all right, well, even he says it, so we can move on. But I think similar to what you're saying in terms of a lack of opportunities, or at least being judged on a very small selection of games, is the big name in this squad, which is of course Mauro Icardi, who was in Sampaoli's final 30, but obviously got cut before the World Cup in favour of those players that we mentioned already, Aguero or Higuain, in that number 9 role. Now we should see him kind of get a longer run in the team, or you'd hope. Do you think now Icardi would be like the first choice number 9 for Argentina?
I think that's the obvious assumption to make, isn't it? If you look at the players that have been chosen in this squad, he's certainly the standout centre forward, the focal point of the attack. I think it's been 50-50 between him and Higuain for a while in terms of who's going to get that number 9 shirt, and purely because Higuain was the safe option in terms of, despite his failings in those crucial games, he's scored quite a lot of goals. So it's, again, a golden opportunity for Icardi. It's going to be fantastic to see him linking up with Lautaro Martinez, both at club level and hopefully for the national team. And you've got to think that given the lack of minutes and time that these players have to train all together with the national team, the fact there's a few of these club friendships and club links in the squad is only going to help the understanding on the pitch. So I think that's a massive bonus, and probably Icardi's had even less opportunity for a proper showing of what he can do for the national team. That throwing him in towards the end of qualification when it was sink or swim for the Argentina national team was never going to be a moment where he was going to come in and shine unless he scored a hat-trick and that was that. But it was such a terrible situation to come into. I don't think he was ever going to flourish. So
I also think with that, at the time, if I remember correctly, the first game of that was against Uruguay in Montevideo, where, I mean, it was a goalless draw, and Icardi kind of was just left up front on his own against obviously a very formidable defence with no service. He had nothing to go on. And then the second game of that week of qualifying was against Venezuela at home, which Icardi didn't score, but was in the position where he could have, on another night, he could have had a hat-trick. I mean, there was an own goal that he was basically on the end of. It ended up being the Venezuelan defender that put it in. But it was a very small selection of games to kind of write him off. And I think, as I say, on another day, he could have easily had 1, 2, even 3 against Venezuela. And then everyone would have said, oh, wow, it's a masterstroke by Sampaoli.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's also one of these players who because he doesn't necessarily do a whole lot more in the build up, and he's very much judged on the goals. So it's either feast or famine, really, and that's why I think he's just not had that rub of the green yet. And if he does put one away in that first game, then I think there is still a certain bias against him because of his relationship with Wandanara. I think we'll see that hopefully start to melt away if he can start well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you say, that potential partnership at club level with Lautaro could be hugely beneficial for Argentina. And also that personal relation, if there was indeed any problem with the squad, which obviously was always just rumours, certainly now with a lot of those older faces leaving, potentially Icardi could become one of the more senior and respected figures in the squad. I mean, I would have thought a lot of the younger players will certainly look up to Icardi for what he's done in Italian football.
Definitely, and the fact he's captain at Inter as well means that he's definitely a leader despite being relatively young. And yeah, this could be as crucial for Icardi as Dybala. So those two are definitely, for me, guys who are unlucky not to have played a bigger part over the last few years, but now really is their moment to grab the limelight and really drive this team forward. And their scoring records are phenomenal. They're two of the biggest clubs in Italy, and I think it's high time that they were given a proper chance of striking up a relationship together.
Yeah, and then of course, with the absence of the older generation, the other centre forward option in Scaloni's squad for next month is of course Giovanni Simeone, who is perhaps a bit of a surprise inclusion, his first senior call. What do you make of Simeone's part in the squad?
It's an interesting one, really, because I've long been someone who's not necessarily doubted him, but I've always thought he was a relatively limited striker. A good player, don't get me wrong, but someone who is more of just there to sort of tap things in, and he's improved his game massively while he's been in Italy, and I think he's a good option. More if anything for his mentality. He seems to be quite a big game player, which obviously is something that Argentina have been lacking. But for a long time, I wasn't the biggest fan of him, and I still don't think he would be in my ideal Argentina team. I think Dybala, Icardi, Pavón, Martinez, and Angel Correa would pretty much be my top five going forward. Mm-hmm. Gio seems like someone who's worth a try. Obviously, he's someone who fits that number 9 target man kind of back up to Icardi. So it's worth giving him a go, and I certainly would like to see how he fits in. It might be a case of not necessarily picking the most talented technically, but someone who can come in, do a job, and he might be a good player to bring others into the game and just kind of complement the team as a whole. So I'll be very interested, but I think I'd rather maybe see the likes of Alario or someone like that given a chance.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously other names that didn't get called up, and the likes that you mentioned, Alario there has obviously had experience already, has dropped down the pecking order slightly, but I guess now there's a bit of a clean slate for all these guys who really will be looking at how they performed this season at club level, the ones that are already in Europe. I mean, there's going to be obviously able to compare quite easily how they're getting on with the likes of Alario, and obviously with Gio Simeone, Joaquin Correa now at Lazio, who obviously kind of can shift to a number of positions, but is an option. Sebastian Druisi still at Zenit, or even maybe someone like Maxi Romero if he gets fit and starts playing at PSV. But there are those other younger options. I think the point you were making with Simeone is an accurate one, and when you go back to his time with the under-20s where he was so prolific and one of the rare recent successes at youth level with that under-20s squad. But someone else that you mentioned there was kind of the catalyst there with Angel Correa.
Oh yeah,
And he sort of Correa was the standout player, but it was Simeone that needed to be there to kind of put the ball in the net around the 6-yard box. It was just always alert. Whether he can bring those kind of qualities to the international level, obviously the huge step up that there is from under 20s to the seniors, but Angel Correa is an interesting one, who seems to have really blossomed over the last year or so at Atletico. And is now back in contention with Argentina. Is he someone that you think really going forward needs to stake a claim more permanently with Argentina?
Yeah, definitely. He's long been someone that I've admired. Like you said, with that under 20, I think he pretty much created all of Gio Simeone's goals. So again, there might be a good relationship there. Yeah, I think he's versatile. He can play out wide. He can play sort of in behind the striker. Again, someone who I would have had maybe in the World Cup squad, although it didn't seem that Sampaoli fancied him. Yeah, it's not been all plain sailing at Atletico Madrid, but certainly working under Cholo Simeone, he's starting to flourish now, and he's getting to that age where he's had his bedding in period, and obviously he's had his health issues in the past, but he seems to be all over that now. And yeah, I think he's just a really intelligent player who can really worry and use that kind of classic potrero skills to make something happen. So yeah, I like him as an option as a wide forward, or someone who can just slot in. So yeah, I like Correa in there, and yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly thought he was someone who was a little unfortunate to drop down the pecking order as he did. I mean, arguably, he came into the senior side so young and so early that maybe it was a little bit early because he hadn't really proved himself at that point at Atletico, but he does seem to have been doing that now, and he does have a versatility that he can play sort of anywhere across an attack, and as you say, I think he certainly should be an option going forward. Likewise, in a sort of similar position, and someone who has had success relative at the World Cup as well, it would be Christian Pavón. He's obviously still there with a number of other options from the Superliga. What did you make of some of those selections, including Pavón?
I think, yeah, Pavón was one of the few players to come out of the World Cup with his reputation, well, maybe not enhanced, but certainly not damaged. And he gives Argentina something different to those other names we've mentioned. He's direct. He's got great pace. He can come in off either flank. He's got goals. He's got assists. So again, I think that there's a nice blend there of sort of more central strikers, guys who could play just behind, and then you've got a few who can also operate in the wider areas. So I think they all complement each other. They're all nice and young, and they'll be sort of hitting peak age in about 4 years. So it's good to have some Superliga representation as well, like you said. Along with him, Matias Vargas, Ezequiel Palacios, they're all players that I've watched now for a few years, and well, less so in Palacios' case because his rise has been pretty meteoric. But certainly, it's good to have that the fact that they're sort of taking into account some of these guys who are still plying their trade in Argentina, but seem to have really big futures. So I definitely, even though Pavón is probably one of the more obvious picks, I think looking down through the list, certainly in the midfields and with some of the defenders, it's very encouraging to see Scaloni and Aimar not afraid to go with locally based players and guys who, in my opinion, could be really, really big players for the national team in the future.
Yeah, I know you're a big fan of Vargas, Tom. What for those people that maybe haven't seen him play? What qualities would he bring to Argentina?
Oh, he's just an absolute joy to watch. Really, he's built like a number 10, but operates out on the left, and often you can see him cutting inside. He's got that great eye for a pass. He's got lovely close dribbling control, and he can also chip in with quite a few goals. He's got good crossing ability as well. So he's a versatile player to have. I mean, principally on the left, but not as a chalk on his boots type winger, that's for sure. So I think he's someone who fits that typical Argentinian enganche role, but he's got something a little bit different about him, and I like Vélez. I like what they do, and I like the number of young players they bring through, and he's had a fantastic second half of last season, and I think if he keeps going the way he is, then a move to Europe's definitely on the cards. He's been compared to Hazard, but I think that's a little bit fanciful. He doesn't quite have the explosive acceleration, but there's shades of him in there. So I definitely think that he's one who most European-based listeners would probably not have seen much of, and could be quite impressed with. He's one who makes you smile when you're watching the game.
Yeah, certainly, and I think those Hazard similarities, which obviously are sort of typical of Argentine media here, are probably a bit far-fetched. But there are, as you say, there are similarities, and I think he will be an interesting one probably when you see him get his move to Europe, which seems inevitable at this point within the next 6 months probably, to see where he could go and where he could fit in, certainly with the eyes on 2022, if not 2019. And in a similar position from the Superliga, we also saw Gonzalo Martinez finally, some would argue, get a chance, because obviously he's a little bit older than the likes of Vargas or Palacios. Where do you think he has a future in Argentina, or is this is he benefiting from this squad being something of a mismatch?
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make there. I think he, on the one hand, is deserving of a call-up, but at the same time, because he is the type of player that maybe Argentina seem to produce a lot of, he's not someone who's really had an opportunity, especially still being based in Argentina, albeit at one of the biggest clubs in the country. I think his performances over the last 18 months in the Superliga definitely give him a chance. He's there's no reason why he shouldn't be considered, and I think if he was maybe playing a club in Europe, his sort of star factor would slightly be enhanced. So yeah, maybe the likes of Lanzini and players like that have meant that he's been further down the pecking order. But you never know, if he really shines, he could definitely become certainly a squad member or someone who comes in and out. I don't think he's necessarily someone who you would build the squad around, but he's definitely an option. It's worth considering. On a similar note, one of your Independiente boys, Maxi Meza, obviously he got to the World Cup, but do you see him, like Pity Martinez, potentially staking a sort of a longer term future in the national team, or do you think he's kind of on the fringes as well?
Yeah, I think I'd put him in the same bracket, to be honest. I think the two have been two of the standout performers in Argentina for the past year or so. I think a lot of people were perhaps a bit harsh on Messi, and I think he became something of a soft target for Argentina's failings in Russia, just because of the fact that I think he wasn't very well known. So as soon as Argentina weren't very good, and Sampaoli was kind of throwing him on at weird times or starting him in sort of odd formations, I think it was easy to kind of single Messi out as a real weak spot, when really I think it was plain to see that Sampaoli's system or sort of lack of clear idea was the bigger issue. But I think until perhaps either one of them get their move to Europe, which has obviously been discussed or rumoured for a long time now, I'm not sure if we'll be able to put them in that next bracket up, because otherwise I think they're just going to remain as they are, which are decent attacking options, and two of the best players in the Argentine Superliga, but not necessarily, as you say, someone that you could say, Argentina need to put them, find a place for them somewhere in the side. But obviously there are other options that weren't included in this squad, like Centurion, or which obviously comes with a bit of baggage.
Just a bit.
Or Rigoni, Lamela, Ocampos, or Soracho at Racing. From any of those group or anyone else, do you think there's anyone else that you could say is a bit unfortunate to be left out this time?
I definitely think Lamela is someone who should have been in the thoughts of the national team for the World Cup, and definitely now, as he seems to be getting back to full fitness. Obviously, if Lanzini was fit, I think he would be in there. As you said, Centurion, Barco might be someone who's might be a bit too early for him, but he's certainly someone who should be around there. Even Tucu Pereira seems to be having a good start to the season at Watford, and I don't think he's too different in terms of level to someone like Martinez or Meza. I think the thing is with a lot of those players, there's nothing really extraordinary that marks them out as something different. I think in international football, you kind of do need a few specialists who might only have one sort of trick or one obvious skill or attribute, but in a situation where you haven't got as much time to build a collective unit, sometimes you need these kind of more obvious ploys to turn to. And I think Martinez and Meza are just all round very good 7 out of 10s, but maybe there's not quite something that marks them out as a potential game changer in the way that potentially some of the others like Vargas or Servi or Vasquez do have. They're all very different, and they've all kind of got something a bit unique to them, in the same way that you could say the same for Centurion as well. He might not be the most reliable, but he could come up with that game-changing moment. So it's going to be really interesting, because I think in those attacking midfield roles there is a bit more scope to try some things. As I said, I think I would definitely have Lamela in there, and probably Lanzini when he's fit.
Yeah.
But apart from that, there's not anyone who I'd really say is nailed on. Whereas if I look a bit further through the squad, or certainly midfield anyway, Lo Celso, Paredes, Ascasibar, I think those are guys who you kind of really are building your team around. Yeah,
and I think, like you say, there seems to be quite a large pool of those attacking midfield players, but they're all we're still kind of waiting for someone to rise just a bit above that crop to stake a claim, which I guess is promising to have that selection and to wait and see how that plays out. But like you said, I think slightly further back in midfield is where I think there's perhaps the biggest cause for optimism, in my opinion, with Argentina. I think for a long time, it's been the midfield really where Argentina have really struggled, and I think several managers now have kind of struggled to balance that. Sabella kind of worked a way around it by his method of sort of organised chaos, really. I think dropping Di Maria back into a sort of more of a midfield role helped with that and enabled Argentina to break, but with his engine was able to come back and put a shift in. But then since then, we've often found that Argentina have either had several attacking midfield players, number 10 types, and then defensive midfield players, and nothing in between. No one who could really link the two. I think Bowser was probably the worst for that, and you ended up with these weird sort of almost midfieldless teams. But now the three that you've mentioned, Lo Celso, Paredes and Ascasibar, there's three there that almost look like a ready fit midfield three. Are those the three that you have most optimism going forward, even as far as 2022?
Definitely. I think what you said there was spot on, really. I think there's been a few unfortunate things, like maybe the constant injuries to Gago, who was someone who did seem to be able to knit the defence and midfield together a bit better. But now we've got this exciting trio. Obviously, Lo Celso is someone who can act as more of a the most attacking of that three, or you could even use him as a number 10 as he was sort of deployed for Rosario Central. But we've seen that for Paris Saint-Germain that he can operate further back, either maybe as an 8 or even deeper than that. Well, I think he is probably a little bit wasted there. Perez is a player that I've liked for a long time, ever since he sort of broke through at Boca and was pinging some nice long ranges in. And I think it was a shame that he wasn't brought in for the World Cup. I saw him in the friendly against Italy, and he didn't do much, but at the same time, I think it's a position where you're not really going to stand out. You're kind of there more as set the tempo, get the passing going. You're not necessarily going to be flying into tackles or be popping up and scoring goals. But I think he's a really talented footballer. He's a player I'd like to see a lot more of in the Argentina shirt. I think on that point as well of that link between defensive midfield and attacking midfield, the inclusion of Ezequiel Palacios is really exciting, because much like Enzo Perez, who the man he's pretty much replacing at River right now, this is a guy who has sort of developed into sort of a box-to-box midfielder almost, and even though he's only got a fairly small amount of games under his belt, he's already shown, I think, a little bit of everything. And he might not necessarily be the best prospect coming through, but I think he's the one that fits the needs of the national team most. So I think the fact that he's already been parachuted into the national team speaks very highly of that sort of talent identification that nations like Uruguay have been very good at doing, in terms of saying, okay, look, it doesn't matter that you've only paid, I don't know, 15, 20 times for River, maybe even less than that. We're going to get you in because we can see you as part of this system. So I think, out of all the young players and all the local best players, I think Palacios is the one that I'm most heartened and excited by.
Yeah, I think that reason that you mentioned is, I guess he has the least amount of perhaps competition for that quite specific role which has been lacking. And then obviously in midfield, there's a few others that we could mention that weren't included but could play a key role. And I think someone else, when we were mentioning Vélez earlier, who looks really destined, I think, to play some role at some point, would be Santiago Cáceres, who obviously went to Villarreal in this window. Do you think he was a little bit unfortunate not to be included here?
Maybe, but at the same time, I think Ascasibar is definitely the standout defensive midfield talent. Maybe you could have seen Cáceres come in place of Battaglia, but perhaps the fact that those two guys have just got a bit more European experience. Cáceres is only just making his first steps, albeit very promising ones. And I think, given a bit more time, we could definitely see him entering into the equation for the Copa America. I think that's a possibility, and one that I'd be all for, especially if you kind of think of his link up with Vargas and some of the other Vélez products. Even Dominguez as well is a guy who I think might have a national team future ahead of him. But I think it's time for Russo Ascasibar to have a go. He's the most obvious replacement for Mascherano in so many ways. He's definitely got that pit bull spirit and that real energy. I think that is the key thing. The Argentinian midfield was just so lacking in any mobility or intensity, and I think he is going to really set the tone. And I think he's going to be a really key piece. So yeah, there's options. There's always the hope that Kranevitter might get back to his best, and then there's guys like Guido Pizarro, Ivan Marcone, Guido Rodriguez, who can all do a job. But yeah, for me, Ascasibar, and then hopefully Cáceres as a future backup would be the two sort of designated defensive midfielders that I'd like to see going forward.
Yeah, I think Ascasper, as you say, is absolute ready-made Mascherano replacement. Well, it's probably a ready-made Mascherano replacement before Russia. It's just a bit unfortunate we are now in the position where we're having to see it now. But I think this squad, his inclusion is one of the real plus points from this group that we're going to see next month. Which then I guess brings us swiftly on to what's often seen as the obvious weakness with Argentina, which would be the back four. And we've kind of been going through all this list of names of world-class talents that maybe weren't included in Russia, or world-class potential talents that are coming through in the attacking areas. The pickings are perhaps a little bit slimmer when you get to the defence. Obviously, in this squad, two players that have come back in would be Funes Mori and Pesela. Are you happy that they're both there?
I'm not sure about Funes Mori. I think there's certain qualities that he does bring. He's obviously a lot more mobile. He's got a bit more pace. But I think it might have even been you who said this on Twitter the other day, where he can look great for about 89 minutes, but then commit a horrendous error. And that's kind of him all over, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think he also benefits slightly from having the kind of personality that the typical Argentinian football supporter likes to see. Do you know what I mean? That kind of passion. When he was playing for River and like scoring in a Super Classico, and the kind of shirt ripping passion that the supporters love to see, and I think that kind of gets him by a little bit as well. It's sort of real hearty challenges and the famous huevos the kind of gets you by it to some extent in Argentina. But yeah, similarly, I just kind of can't help but feel every time he plays, for it, whether at club level or internationally, think at some point he'll do something which, if doesn't cost a goal, will give away a great chance. And moving forward, I just don't know if you want to have that built into the team when you can start exploring other options. Pizzello, on the other hand, I think was a bit unlucky to have been overlooked for a while, and so hopefully this will be his opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. I think Pizzella's sort of the one that you definitely say, okay, this is someone who we can start maybe not building a defence around, but is a good shout for a starting centre back. I think Funes Mori, if he is going to be included, is very much a stopgap. He's sort of similar to Rocco in that sense of, like you said, doing some crazy stuff, but maybe coming up with some really memorable moments as well that kind of that sort of endear him to the public. So I think Pezzella is the one that I'm more excited about. I think Kahneman is interesting as well because he's quietly been going about his business at Gremio and playing very well, pretty no nonsense. But if he can do that for the national team, then I don't see why not. He's still 27 or something, so he's not too old. And then obviously Franco as well, getting a chance. So even though we're sort of maybe not lamenting, but questioning Funes Mori's inclusion, we do at least have Franco as one of those young potential centre backs that hopefully they can integrate now. And even though he might not have that much experience, at least he's going to have some, to build on. And then in 4 years' time, then maybe he will have enough. So I think, 3 out of 4 is not bad from the centre backs.
Yeah, I think you're right as well. And to point out those two that have come in from South America, I think, as you said, Kahneman has been very, very solid and obviously won 2 Copa Libertadores at 2 different clubs. He's been one of the outstanding defenders in South America, which, a lot of people will argue, well, okay, it's in South America. But I do think he's been worthy of a closer look. And I think it does also have that character trait, which I think would be very popular, like I just mentioned. And then for Alan Franco, I'm not sure if he's quite ready now. I mean, at 21, but it is a great prospect, and I think there are a few that we can look at. From what I understand, actually, Juan Foyth was going to be included in this squad, but I think nursing a slight injury, which is why he's not being involved in any of the Spurs squads at the moment. But he's one, obviously, at a young age and has got his move from Estudiantes to Tottenham and could feature. And then, obviously, the likes of Martinez Quarter at River or Germán Conti just got his move to Benfica. Who else do you think from that kind of next generation could form a part of the Argentine defence going forward?
Well, I think one player that we definitely need to mention is Mamana. I think for me, he would be first name on the defensive team sheet, and I'd quite like to see him when he's fully recovered from his injury. See him alongside Pesela, maybe as the starting centre back duo. So I would like to see him come in. I think the guys you've mentioned are definite good shouts, and again, get them in young. Maybe they're not ready now, but build up their experience and integrate them into the squad so that they are ready in a few years' time. Martinez Quarta, Conti. I think Juan Cruz Comar is someone who has potential to maybe being in that bracket as well. I've just written a piece on him, so you can check that on Twitter, everyone. Shameless plug there. I'm sorry.
Welcome.
And then I think you can look at Marco Senesi as well. I think that I think there's even some younger guys than that who've probably even less well known, like Balerdi, who's been brought along more as kind of for the sparring squad, right?
Yeah, and obviously Scaloni knows him well from the under-20s that obviously just won in Spain, the Cotif tournament. So he obviously hasn't made his senior debut at Boca yet, I don't think. But yeah, I think he's certainly someone to keep an eye on for the longer term.
Yeah, and then there might be a few other kind of guys more in the mould of Kahneman who could be given an opportunity to see if they fit in. Like I'm not his biggest fan, but Magajan might be someone who's worth having a look at.
Yeah, I mean he was linked with this squad actually. I think he must have just missed out. But
yeah, so there's a few players like that who, again, like with some of those attacking midfielders, none of them really fill you with loads of optimism, but there seems to be lots of semi-decent. I don't know what the situation with Masaccio is. I think on paper he would be a really good centre-back to get in there, but I've not really been following his career much lately, but I always kind of put him in that mix. I don't know why. I don't know if it's like Garay, where he just kept getting linked even though there was no chance of him coming back.
No, I mean, I think it's a good shout. My understanding, since his move to Milan, hasn't been a regular starter, which I think has been a problem. But certainly prior to that, he seemed someone who was a bit unfortunate not to get more of a look in the squads, given the lack of options really in central defence. I mean, now I think we're talking about if we're bringing in some of these young players, there's a bit more competition. But certainly over the past 2 years, sometimes you kind of look at the squad and think, could we not have had a look at Musacchio when we've obviously seen plenty of the likes of Funes Mori or Rojo in central defence. But I mean, there are some options coming through.
And would you see Otamendi back in?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in the short term, it seems more likely than not. I think if he makes himself available, any permanent coach, I think, is going to look at the situation and see Otamendi at the heart of the City defence and think, well, if he's available, he's got to be in my team. So certainly, if he is available, I think we'll still see Otamendi for the next year or so, at least. But with all those names we mentioned, I think it is vital that, one, if he is included, that a really reliable long-term partner can come into the team. And I don't see that being Funes Mori, even though they were obviously for quite a while that preferred two. But someone who could maybe come in, learn a bit from Otamendi, and then eventually take on that leader's role in the back four. That's what I would assume would happen over the next 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah, that seems a sensible shout, and I agree with you on that front. I would definitely have Otamendi still in there if he is available. I think if I was pressed to kind of pick a sort of 3 or 4 defenders that I'd be taking to the Copa America, I'd probably have Otamendi, Mamana, Bezela, and then one other.
Yeah.
Whether that be someone who can come in and do a job now, maybe like Kahneman, or one of these younger players like Foyth, like Franco, like Martinez Cuarta. So yeah, I think that central defence is maybe not brilliant right now, but I feel like there are some options. But I'm still really, really worried by fullback.
Yeah, I mean, moving on to the fullbacks. Obviously, on the left, Nicolas Tagliafico is still in the squad. Again, was one of the players I thought came out of Russia without damaging his reputation. Is now at Ajax and performing well, and I think is still the best option at left back. Do you see anyone else at the moment rivaling Tagliafico at left back?
Not really, to be honest. I think, as you said, he was probably one of the few World Cup survivors that I would 100% pop into this team straight away. I think Acuna is worth having. Certainly as someone who can play further forward if necessary, and I don't think he's played badly at all. I just think he's not an out and out left back, and I think as much as Sampaoli wanted the style to be a bit more progressive and intense, Argentina kind of, it feels right having a back four and some guys who can get forward but maybe aren't necessarily flying fullbacks in the Brazilian tradition. So I would probably have Acuna in there for the time being and sort of use him as a transition. Apart from that, I think Gabriel Rojas at San Lorenzo is someone who's probably worth keeping an eye on. And other than that, you've got a few guys who promised a lot but haven't delivered, like Jonathan Silva or Insua maybe. But I'm really struggling apart from that. Is there anyone else you can see in there?
No, I was going to say I think left back seems to be the one position where there isn't several young players that you can kind of say, oh well, maybe. Like you say, Rojas is one. I think another San Lorenzo, Pereira, who was at the Cotif tournament, looked decent. I think he was from San Lorenzo. But again, I mean, it's far too early to be able to start saying for those players, yeah, they're going to be even the backup for the senior team. So for the foreseeable future, I think it's got to be Tagliafico. And I mean, I don't have any problem with that. I think he's proved himself a very, very competent defender. I mean, in fact, he can go in and play centrally as well. I think it's testament to how good he is defensively. But he also is not bad going forward. So it's not someone who, it's not as if like some of the in previous teams where you feel as though Argentina are almost playing like 4 central defenders.
Yeah.
I think he does offer something on the overlap, and I think with time he can strike up quite a useful relationship with someone on that left of midfield, as he did at Independiente with Barco, for example. But I think that will need a bit of time and kind of a settling down of a team so that he can build on that. And I think perhaps shifting over to the right is where we see a bit more of that sort of attack mindedness coming in with the possibilities there. I think obviously Gabriel Mercado is still in the squad, and like Tagliafico, I guess can operate either at fullback or at right back, but doesn't offer quite that same sort of marauding attacking option. And I think I'm glad to see Fabricio Bustos get back into the squad, because I think he was fairly unfortunate with what happened prior to the World Cup, because I think he kind of got that game at the Spain friendly when obviously Argentina got thrashed 6-1, and it kind of put him back. And I think it was a bit unfair. I kind of was under the impression really that anyone in the same position at right back probably would have got overrun. But I do think it damaged his chances of going to Russia. So I'm glad to see he's back in. What do you make of Bustos going forward as possibly Argentina's right back?
Yeah, someone I've been expecting and tipping to get that right back slot. I mean, like you said, I think it was a shocking decision not to bring him along. No one covered themselves in glory in that game, and again, I saw him at the Italy friendly just before that, and I thought he did all right. Obviously, a bit nervy, but what that's to be expected from a young player. Certainly, out of all the options at right back, he seems to be the brightest and the one who's kind of earmarked to be that right back going forward. And as you said, I think Mercado is a decent sort of versatile option to have for the time being. So yeah, I think it's good, and the fact there's quite a strong Independiente feel to that back line, and certainly throughout the squad actually. I think that's something that will help them all settle in as well. But I was surprised to see the Placido in there. I think that was a bit of a bolt from the blue, and even he seemed pretty shocked by it. So it's interesting to see some different names being tried out. And I think there's a few others in there that could sort of be interchangeable with Di Placido as an option, but certainly there needs to be a move away from Mercado and Salvio as right backs.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree. I think Di Placido, it does seem a slightly odd option, or at least I thought the timing of it seems a bit odd, because for me, prior to his move to Lanús a year ago, you could make a claim that he was one of the best right backs in the league. But injury or just like a loss of form, I think, has sort of put him back, and we haven't really seen the same effect in Lanús. And then obviously the guy that he kind of went to join there in Lanús, Jose Luis Gomez, was another option previously for Argentina, and injuries really ruined his chances over the year. And I think probably as of now, the person who replaced Di Placido in Atlético Tucumán, Leonardo Godoy, for me is probably the best Superliga option at right back.
Yeah, I'd agree there. Godoy and Jose Luis Gomez, I think, much for a muchness there. But I would like to see Godoy get the chance. I think he's probably got a bit more, potential than Di Placido. So he's someone I expect to see in. I think Renzo Sarabia at Racing as well is another that we could see in there. So right back's looking a little bit better, but there's still no sort of star names really. I think we all look at Bustos as the main guy already, but he hasn't done anything yet. So it's all very much guesswork at this point, and that fullback issue, which I think probably as long as I've known you and maybe even longer, has been Argentina's real weakness for all their issues in central defence and central midfield as well. It's that fullback option where there's still very little and also very little coming through. So yeah, tricky for whoever becomes the next boss.
Absolutely, yeah. And then obviously that brings us on finally to the goalkeeper situation, which I guess is probably the position we're looking at this squad which is most settled. When you look at, obviously, Sergio Romero comes back in after missing the World Cup through injury. Franco Armani keeps his place, perhaps not showing his best in Russia, but come back to River Plate and has been outstanding again. And then finally, Geronimo Rulli gets another opportunity. Obviously, his form last season put pay to his chances, but started the season well this weekend with Sociedad. So hopefully he can stake a claim. But are you happy with those three, or did you want to see even someone new come in?
Yeah, I was happy with that actually. I know that a lot of people probably will have some issues with Romero being in there, but as we've said many times, he's always performed for Argentina. He's got plenty of experience. He seems to be a good character around the dressing room, and realistically, as a third choice, I mean, what's the harm in having him there? Really, I think that with this very young squad, it's going to be important to have some continuity and some wise heads in there. He's almost made a club career out of being a a second or third choice. So I don't see sort of any issue with Romero being there. Armani's proven himself, and I think will probably start as the number one. He's just broken a record, I think, in terms of minutes without conceding. So he's obviously in good form, and has been ever since he moved to River. And Rulli, like you said, is someone who's been sort of, we all thought he probably would have been established by now, and it's taken a bit longer. But he's someone who I've always thought is a good keeper, and again someone who I would have 100% taken to the World Cup. So yeah, that three's good. There might not be necessarily a world class option in there, and I feel like there's lots of and there always seems to be quite a lot of good, if not spectacular, Argentinian keepers dotted around. So yeah, I don't know if you were to take one of those guys out, who would you go for, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big question is whether or not now, with so many of the older players leaving, whether you kind of took the opportunity to say, okay, well, now's as good a chance as any to finally end Romero's long stint as goalkeeper. I mean, although he's always been a great servant to the national team and has never really let them down, you always have that lingering question of whether or not the national team number one can continue being the number one when he's a permanent number two at club level. I think the other two are kind of there on merit. I think anyone who was just judging Armani on Russia alone really is doing so unfairly, because he's an outstanding goalkeeper, and I think Rulli, as you say, has been the one that for years everyone has kind of hoped would be the Argentina number one. I think now he should get an opportunity if he can, get his club form consistently good. Then I think he's got a real good chance of staking that number one position. Because, like you say, I think when you look outside of those three, anyway, there's no one that leaps out and says, "Oh, I can't believe he's not in the squad." I mean, there's some younger goalkeepers like Axel Werner or Juan Musso. But they're still to prove themselves really in Europe. In Argentina, we obviously have Andrade or Herrera as options. But again, you couldn't really sit here without some bias, I think, towards the clubs that they play for and argue that they should be Argentina's number one, or even really in the squad. So I think those three seem like a fairly sensible option.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, I think Musa and Werner in particular are guys who, if they have a strong season this year, I think Werner's on loan at Huesca, so that could be a chance to really show what he can do, and obviously Musa has been great for Racing before he's moved to Udinese. So yeah, I feel like there's a good core of options. I think you could even sort of stretch it to see the likes of Monetti or Marquezine be included, but yeah, like you say, they're all much of a muchness really. None of them are really going to be troubling Armani or Rulli for that number one jersey just yet. So yeah, for the time being, I don't mind Romero being in there, even though, yeah, like you said, it could be a chance to break from the past. It'd be interesting to see how this young Boca keeper, who's sort of another one of these guys who's gone along for sparring, does, because he seems to be rated very highly, and he's extremely young and already on the fringes of the first team. I think is it Roffo his name? Yeah. So yeah, he could be one who obviously it's going to be a long time before we see him, but he's one who looks like he could have a bit of extra class about him, and there's a couple of others knocking about. So I think in goalkeeper, it's one where we can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief and not be pulling our hair out about.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, the AFA still need to make a decision. For now, we have Scaloni and Aymar, possibly Walter Samuel coming in as well as an assistant. But there are reasons for optimism there. I mean, do you think Argentina is looking in a good place moving forward?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think it's far too early to say. I don't want to sit on the fence too much, but generally speaking, I think they're at least making some good first tentative steps. But I think a lot will depend on who they get in as manager. Some of the names have been promising, and I think they're guys who would favour a more youthful approach, which I think can only benefit the national team. I do think that as things currently stand, it would be a bit of a push to see Argentina as one of the favourites in 4 years' time. But then, having said that, we saw Brazil really struggle for 2 years after the last World Cup, and then they got the right manager in and absolutely romped through the qualification. So 4 years is a very long time in football, and you never know with the forward line they've always got, the potential of Messi still being part of the squad in some capacity. All you need really is a few players to pop up in key positions, and we're looking at a completely different proposition really. So at the moment, I think, this is one where hopefully people can be a bit patient about. I know that is a big ask for large swathes of the fan base, but certainly in the next 2 years, I think it should be all about development and trying to find some kind of collective style and play, and then maybe we can start thinking about the World Cup. But yeah, how about you? What do you think, Pia?
No, I mean, I'd have to agree with you. I mean, it's impossible at this point. It's nice to see some of the new players come in, and they can provide some reasons for optimism, as we mentioned. So many potentially world-class players available. But I mean, a lot's going to depend on what the AFA do next, as always, and where Argentina go long term from that. So it has to be some sort of project in place. So who knows? But it's certainly going to be interesting to see how that develops over even the next year, but certainly building up to 2022. But anyway, I think we've probably gone on long enough, and I know it's getting late for you, Tom, so I'll let you get off. But thanks very much for coming on. Obviously, give Tom a follow on Twitter. It's at TomRobbo89. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be on, and who knows? Hopefully, if it goes down well, there might be some more of these pods popping up on your feeds.
Yeah, just going to try and work out how to edit it first, and then we'll see how we do. But let's hope so. So thanks again, Tom. Thanks for listening as well, and we'll hopefully speak to you again soon.